Well, hi, everyone. My name is David, and I'm really appreciative that you all joined us today for the webinar. I'm going to give you a little bit of my background. So I've been working in process a long time. I actually started as a consumer of processes. So I worked in the information technology sector. I was a consumer of the incident management process, the change management process, service requests, those types of things. Went to my first change management meeting a lot longer ago than I'd like to admit, but I've been heavily involved in process as a consumer for many, many years. As my career evolved, I actually moved into becoming a process consultant. And I worked with a lot of large, complex organizations, helping them to assess their as-is state, to develop new processes, and to create the automation for their processes going forward. And I learned a lot. I saw a lot of different companies, a lot of different ways that processes worked. Moving forward a few years past that, I became involved with Navvia. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Navvia. And we're a process company, initially a process consulting company, but now more of a software company. So I understand process from that perspective, actually pulling a product together, but not only because we have a process consulting tool, process tool, but also because we have internal processes we use to develop the software, to implement the software, support the software. So there's the business processes that go along. So I actually have an understanding process from a variety of different perspectives, and hopefully I can share some of that information with you all today. Just a little background on Navvia, if you don't know us. We actually started back in 1999 as a process consultancy, and I was one of the first consultants. So that's where I gained a lot of process consulting experience. And we did a lot of work in large organizations like the New York Stock Exchange, the Bank of New York Mellon, Coca-Cola, Staples. And during that time, we learned a lot about how you put together process documentation, how you map your processes. And during that time, we worked with a lot of the, Microsoft Office suite, if you will. We worked with Visio, we worked with Excel, PowerPoint, all of those different tools. And we found that to be a kind of a cumbersome way of doing it. So we created the Navvia Process Designer as a way to improve our own internal productivity. We've left the consulting business behind, and we decided to take that tool that we initially developed as an internal productivity tool and bring it forward as a commercial offering. Excuse me. So today, that's what we do. We sell, we support, we market the Navvia Process Designer. If you'd like to learn more about the tool, you can check out some of the reviews on g2.com or check us out at navvia.com, the website. So today's webinar. So best practices in process design and documentation. Like I said, I've seen a lot of process documentation over the years, and I've seen good process documentation, bad process documentation, and everything in between. So I really want to share some of that experience with you and show some practical examples of how we go about documenting processes. So we'll start the conversation by just discussing some of the reasons why process design and documentation is essential to your organization. It really is a crucial thing, and it's important, especially in this fast-paced world with things changing so quickly. It's really good to have that documentation, that design, that information in place. Now, I also want to talk about the importance of engaging stakeholders. You need, processes cannot be designed in a vacuum, meaning you can't sit down as a team of one and start designing processes for your organization. It's really important that you engage a larger group of people to get the information you need to do a proper job. We'll talk a little bit about what constitutes good process documentation, what should be in a process document, how it should be organized. That's going to be an interesting part of the presentation today. And we'll also talk about the relationship between process documentation and automation. More than ever, processes are being automated, whether it's in IT systems like ServiceNow or EasyVista, where you're automating your IT processes, whether it's in Salesforce automation systems like Salesforce or HubSpot. Process is really at the root of ensuring you have a good piece of automation. So we'll talk about that relationship and how process documentation can support business process automation. And then we'll open it up to any questions. But as a matter of fact, I'm pretty easygoing here, so we can take questions. I'm going to have Catherine monitor the chat. Catherine, don't hesitate to interrupt me if there's a question. I'll try to keep an eye on it as well. But I'm sort of juggling both the slides and some other things here. So Catherine, if you can just keep me informed, I'd appreciate that. All right. So before we get into the actual presentation here today, I would like to get a sense of where people are in terms of their process documentation efforts. So we're going to put a poll question up in a second. I'd like you to answer the question using the following answers. Now, think of these answers as hurdles. You know, you can't answer 5 if your processes are not documented. So think of it as increasing steps or hurdles, if you will. So a level 1, you know, an ad hoc process or something that's very immature, your processes aren't documented. Level 2, well, you have processes documented, but the quality of the process documentation varies across the company. Processes are consistently documented and centrally stored. That's a level 3. So very consistent, we know where to get them. Process documentation is managed, reviewed, and updated. That would be a level 4. And level 5 would be process documentation helps drive process improvements. So Catherine, if you could put up the poll question, and we'll give everyone, you know, maybe a minute here to respond to the poll. And, you know, this is really just from the perspective like where everyone sits. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer here. I'm sure everyone on the call here today has some interest in process. So I know we're, you know, for the most part, I'm sure where your heads are at, you know, this is a topic that's important to you. But again, it doesn't mean your company takes the same approach. So we've got about 64% of the attendees responding here. Just give it a little bit more time. And we're at 70%. Just give it another moment. I'm not really surprised by what I'm seeing here in terms of responses. It's quite typical, actually. Let's see here. We're at 72%. Just let it go another. And we have a question here from someone. Catherine, if you can take a look at that. Okay, why don't we end the poll here? We got most of the people responding, and we'll share the results. So processes are not documented, 10% of the people who responded. 69% of people say the quality of process documentation varies across the company. You know, that's a very typical response. And, you know, there's some issues with that because, you know, in a company, if you're to pick up an HR process or an IT process or a business process, they should be documented in a consistent way because it makes it easier for the consumer of that information to understand it. If it's formatted in a common approach, if the content is formatted, you know, if some person has a Visio diagram, another person does it on PowerPoint, another part of the organization has it in Lucidchart up in the cloud, it really doesn't help convey that information to the company as a whole. So, but that is a very common answer. It's good to see that 12% have processes that are consistently documented and centrally stored. That's excellent. 5% go that extra step where the documentation is managed, reviewed, and updated on a regular basis. And 3% says that their process documentation helps drive process improvements. So anyway, I thought that was just interesting. I always like to poll the audience to see where they sit, and it you know, it helps inform the presentation. So thank you very much for participating in that. All right. So the first piece of today's discussion is around engaging your stakeholders. And, you know, engaging your stakeholders is critical when designing and documenting processes. I'll share a little story with you. I was on a panel discussion at a conference. Oh, it was a few years ago, but again, I was on this panel discussion and there were 4 of us and we were discussing various aspects of process design, documentation, and the importance of business process management. And one of the persons honestly on the panel was very honest and said, you know, one of the first mistakes I made as someone who's responsible for designing and documenting processes was to pull a little team of people together, go off in a room and start designing all the processes for the company. And we did it as a small team. We're a self-contained group. We came up with what we thought was a beautiful piece of work. And when we published that, nobody was interested. Nobody thought that their involvement was in those processes, nor were they applicable. And in many cases, that process documentation just ended up sitting on a shelf. So when you are designing processes, it's crucial that you involve the people who participate in the process, who consume the process, who have a stake in the process. And this is important because it's going to enhance the buy-in and ownership, OCM, organizational change management. If you go ahead and spend the time to bring other people into the group, they'll have a sense of ownership in the process. And they'll feel like they've been heard, and they'll have a much higher chance of adopting that process or promoting that process to others within the organization. So it enhances buy-in and ownership. It's also going to help you better understand the business needs. So you can't get a full, complete understanding. If you're designing and documenting a process, you need the input of the people who play a role in that process every day. It's crucial. So it gives you an improved understanding of how the processes work today, so that you can adequately capture the as-is process and hopefully improve that process over time. It'll also help you identify potential roadblocks. It could be roadblocks in terms of adoption, or, I remember in one consulting project, we were in a room, we were discussing trying to get everybody on a common change management process. And this one group, I think it was a networking group, we're adamant about saying, no, that doesn't apply to us. That doesn't apply to us. We're different. Our needs are very, very different. We can't have a common change management process here because we're a unique group. Well, that was definitely a roadblock that was causing some disruption. We needed that person to be bought in. So one of the things that does by involving these people is you identify where you might have some challenges. So you can pull the person offside, or you can deal with them in a workshop. But again, it really helps you identify. You don't want to find out that you're going to have those roadblocks after the process has been rolled out. So you need to get that input up front. It's also going to make you much more efficient because you're going to understand the process better. You're not going to get the process mapped out and documented, and then someone comes back to you later on saying you missed an aspect, you're now dealing with this particular aspect of the process. So it's going to increase your efficiency. And the other thing it's going to do is really foster innovation. I noticed, we went through a period where many of us were working from home and somewhat isolated. And when you bring people together, that's when ideas bubble forth, right? That's when people say, hey, what if we did it this way? Or what if we tweak this and had it, presented in this format? Sometimes that's hard to do if you're just trying to deal with everyone through emails and phone calls. Getting people together and engaging the stakeholders could be a great way of fostering that innovation, which is ultimately going to improve your process. So there's different techniques that you could use to engage your stakeholders. Process assessments was something that I used very successfully when I was a process consultant, because it allows you to get a baseline of where you are, understand the gaps in the process, and use that as an opportunity to create some excitement. Like, we can improve this, we can make it better. We're listening to what your pain points are, and we're going to be able to help by doing this exercise of mapping out the new process. So process assessments can be very, very valuable. Interviews, going around and identifying some of the key players in the process and spending some one-on-one time so they can be totally transparent with you about what's working, what's not working, and where some of the pain points might be. But it's also important to bring people together into workshops. And it was really interesting. In a couple of the process workshops I worked, you'd ask a question like, how well is this process documented today? And someone raises their hand and says, it's perfectly well done. There's no issues. And the rest of the team kind of looks and says, well, where is it? What do you mean it's documented perfectly? So workshops, the interviews gives people an opportunity to be transparent with you, but the workshops, then you can have that discussion, because just because you think everything is well documented and the process is working perfectly, it doesn't mean the other people in the room think the same thing. So the workshops, again, gives you that interaction, and it helps you identify the different aspects of the process. A validation session. So once you've done these workshops and perhaps you've mapped out an as-is process, to go back and say, this is what I understand from all of the interviews and workshops that we've done. this is what I believe is the process. Is do we have your agreement on that? Also document reviews. So once everything is compiled in a document, to circulate it for people's comments and feedbacks. So there's different techniques that you can use to engage the different stakeholders. But the elephant in the room is often resistance, right? How do you deal with a lot of the resistance that might be there in terms of doing process improvement? So it's so important to communicate the purpose and benefits of why you're doing this. I mean, you're not doing, you're not implementing. Well, I'll give you an example. A few days ago on the weekend, I had to return something that I ordered from Amazon. And, I didn't know what the process was going to be. So I went online, I found my order, I hit the button that said return. That was pretty simple. Gave me an option to return it to a local Whole Food store. Well, that's cool. I never tried that before. So I clicked on that option. It said, all right, we're going to send you an email. The email will have a QR code. You just take the package, as is. You don't have to repackage it or anything. I take it to Whole Foods. They'll scan the QR code and off it goes. Wow, that is so simple. Made me happy. Oh, and by the way, you'll get your money back within 4 hours if you allow us to credit it to your Amazon account. That's pretty smart, right? Or it'll take 5 days if we put it on your credit card. So the purpose and benefits to Amazon, they were able to cut down in a lot of handling costs. They brought all the packages to essential. So instead of having to pay for return packages on multiple different channels, they brought everything to a central location. They were able to pick it up once a day. They had a technique in there that they can get the money back to the account, so you spend it again on Amazon. There's a whole bunch of benefits in doing it. So if you understand the benefits of improving an incident management process or an asset management process or an expense management process, it's important to convey those benefits. It'll get people more engaged. It's also going to be very important that you foster a sense of ownership. So if you're not listening to people, they'll have resistance. So one good organizational change management technique is to have people own the process, have a process owner, have a process manager, so that they actually contribute to the effort. The more they do that, the less resistance there'll be. It still might not be a simple conversation, but at least they're part of the conversation and they'll move things forward. You can also provide multiple ways to get involved. So I talked about, interviews, workshops, representatives from a group. You don't need everyone from a particular business unit to be part of the process design, but have a representative, so you're not taxing everyone in the group. So if you can give multiple ways for people to get involved, that would be good. Sponsorship. That's elusive because everyone says, we need executive sponsorship. It's sometimes hard to get. What I find, you might get someone come in and kick off the project, but what I find really works better is the support of respected peers. So if there are people in the organization that are typically well respected, and people have a lot of confidence in their abilities and they've been successful in their projects, having them part of the team often, gets people to say, oh, okay, if Sally's part of this team, it must be pretty good. So the support of respected peers can be a good technique. But this is one of the big pain points because you do need the involvement of the different stakeholders. And, these are just some techniques that you can use to help deal with that resistance. Now, one of the things that I found that worked really well were the process assessments, because process assessments do a lot to engage people and also foster a sense of urgency, especially if you're finding issues with the processes. So it's a great way to engage folks. Many organizations I've worked with over the years have always started a process improvement project or a process documentation project with a baseline assessment, because it gives you a sense of where you are today. So you can get things adequately identified and documented. It helps create that sense of urgency, especially if you've been part of an assessment, you've given your feedback. Now you're going to want to hear what's being done with that feedback. So it creates this sense of urgency, which helps propel the project forward. It also lets you learn how others see your processes. So if you're the incident management process owner or the change management or a business process owner, Again, you might think everything's running great, but that might not be how other people see it. So doing a baseline assessment can give you a good sense of where the gaps are in your process. And once you identify those gaps, you can set a roadmap for improvement. Again, that helps with the overall process documentation and mapping project, because they're seeing that they're doing this to help improve the processes that were assessed as part of the assessment. And this whole aspect of continual improvement, process improvement, it's a key part of business process management. So business process management is not creating a process document and putting it on a shelf, but it's that continual process of understanding the process, managing the process, getting the metrics and the key performance indicators from the process, taking action on the process, and then improving your process to go forward. So let's look a little bit of like some of the ways you can do a process assessment. So I have, I'm using our tool for this, but there's many ways you can do a process assessment. I've seen people do it with spreadsheets. If I go into our survey component here, I've set up a process assessment with 5 questionnaires: asset management, change management, incident management, problem management, service request management. And each of those questionnaires has a number of questions, and these questions are organized around different domains of the process. So there's the process itself. What are the steps in the process? Are you following the steps? There's some questions around people. Do you understand your roles and responsibilities? Do you have the right training? There's questions around technology, so you understand if you have the right tools in place to support the process. And then there's also some questions around your partners and suppliers to make sure that the people you interact with, that aspect is working well. So a number of questions across various domains. And you can send these questionnaires. And one of the nice things about doing a process assessment is you can touch a lot of people. Workshops, you'll have a very confined group of people, but an assessment, you can touch a lot of people and get a lot of feedback. So if you can get that feedback, segment the results based on the different, are they managers? Are they stakeholders in the process? Are they users of the process? If you can segment the results, that gives you also a good indication of how different groups in the organization perceive the process. But just to sort of fast forward, I ran some sample data through these questionnaires, and you can pull off a report, and you can easily see at a glance, based on a maturity score. Now, if you're not familiar with the maturity scores, there's a couple of different models out there, but they typically all go from 1 to 5, 1 being a process that's very ad hoc. If you think back to the questionnaire, the question I gave, the poll question, 1 is nothing's in place, 5, it's being continually improved. So processes are typically measured on that scale, where 3 is actually a pretty good performing process. So quickly looking here, you see you have 1 outstanding process, a couple of processes around 3, which is not too bad, and then asset management at a really low level. So you can look at this a couple of ways. Maybe you want some quick wins to take incident management and move it forward. So I can drill into that a little bit and see, hey, I'm doing great on process, people, and technology, but there's some issues with my partners and suppliers. And you might see that might be a trend across all of the questionnaires. So maybe there's a little improvement activity that you can set on the roadmap, that you've got to improve communication with the partners and suppliers of particular processes. So you can use that information to drill in. Or if you go into, the really poorly performing process, you can see, oh, it's really poor right across the board, both from a process, people, like a technology and partner side. So again, doing an assessment is great because you can send this information out, send the questionnaires out, collect the information, present results to people to show where the weaknesses are, use the information that you garnered to build a roadmap for process improvement, and then set that sense of urgency. If they can see we're going to improve the asset management process, first question will be why? Well, you want to explain the benefits. We're going to save money on software audits. If we're caught in a software audit of not having licensed software, that can be very expensive to a company. Or we can just improve our financial management, or we can improve our compliance. But again, we can see here, there's a lot of work to do on asset management, and maybe we should move ahead and work on that. So anyway, just some thoughts around engaging stakeholders and how that can really help you kick off any kind of process improvement project. Are there any questions at this point, Catherine?
Yes, we do have one from Marie. So she wants to know more about the approach EFQM to evaluate the maturity level of the processes. It's not in the chat. Sorry, it's not in the Q&A. It's in the chat section.
EFQM, is that like an emotional quotient? Maria, if you can, I'm not familiar with the EFQM approach. Typically, I use two approaches. I use one based on the capability maturity model, CMM, and another approach based on ISO 30020, which is just another type of assessment methodology that uses 5 levels. I'd love to learn more about EFQM. If you want to send us a note, that would be great. Karen's asking, when and how are the CMMI scores discussed and with what level of employees? That's really interesting. You know, having done a lot of these assessments over time, I've noticed that, you know, senior management hates to see a score of 3. They just automatically think that I shouldn't say that, you know, but a lot of people, you know, they immediately say, I want to be a 5. Well, a 5 can take a lot of work, and, you know, it's great to be a 5, but, you know, it's more important to have things that are a 1 and 2 up to a level 3, because then you're at least at a consistent level. I usually use validation sessions. So I would send out the questionnaires. I would also do some one-on-one interviews and maybe some smaller workshops where I run people through the questions and take more of an individual response or a group response and add those numbers to the scoring. Then when I have all the information together, I like to do a validation. So I like to go back and say, hey, this is what we heard. One of the things I didn't mention in here is many of the questionnaires, at least in our approach, depending how you answer a question, you're prompted for additional information. So why do you think the process is, or what would you think would make it better? So there's that kind of information. So we typically use the scores, the comments, and the information you got back from interviews and workshops to come back and say, hey, this is what we heard from everybody. So the first thing I would do is validate the results. And then once I validate the results, I go away and come up with some action plans for improving the process, and then present that to all employees. So I can show the scores. I can say, this is what we've learned. These are our findings. From the findings, we have these recommendations. And from these recommendations, here's our action plan and our process improvement plan. Again, if anyone has any further questions on this, you can also feel free to respond to the email that Catherine sends out, and I'd be happy to get involved in the dialogue with you. No problem at all in that.
Also, we have 2 more questions in the Q&A section if you want, from Leo and Caleb.
Leo, hey Leo. So can you describe how some of your clients are using process assessment of non-ITSM processes such as HR or financial processes? I think that's a relatively new side for most of our clients. Historically, many of our clients have been IT based, and that's why a lot of if it wasn't evident, these questionnaires were all based on pre-built content that we have in our product. But what we're seeing now more so is people are looking to assess different processes. And there's good news to that, because when you look at a process, there's elements of a process that apply to any process. Is it documented? Is it managed? Is it measured? But every process also has something called base practice. So if you looked at the way the questionnaires are organized, maybe 5 of the questions in a questionnaire are the base practices. So if it's an IT process, you know, do you record assets? Do you track your assets? Do you depreciate your assets? Do you retire your assets? Those might be the 5 or 6 base questions around a particular asset management process. But the rest of the questions are very similar. Is it documented? Did you receive training? Are you aware of any reports that demonstrate how the process is performing? So what we're seeing is people taking our baseline questionnaires and swapping out the 4 or 5 questions that are specific, let's say, to an HR process. Let's say it's an HR onboarding process, and just swapping out those questions. And they can use some of the content in our tool because we have the APQC business process framework. So those base practices are already in the tool. So using a combination of APQC and the common questions, you can actually develop a pretty comprehensive questionnaire for any process. I hope that answered your question, Leo. Caleb. Oh, wow. Caleb had a great question around balancing inclusion and progress. At times, it feels like too many people are being included impedes the progress, yet a better outcome is clear with inclusion. When I was pulling these slides together, I did have a slide on that particular topic, and I just because I'm trying to balance out a lot of things today, and I didn't include it. But there's a what I'll do is I'll try to explain it, but I'll attach it to the email that Catherine's sending out, a slide that we've used in the past. So you look at the different levels in the organization. The different levels in the organization, at the more senior levels, there might be they might get updates. At the lowest level, like the process owner, process manager, they have to be more heavily involved. Others might come to validation workshops. So there's a spectrum, right? So depending on where they are, some people will have to be, I wouldn't say dedicated to it, but they would have to spend a fair bit of time. But as you move up the spectrum, they can spend less time. And I have a slide that describes how you can interact with people across that spectrum. So I'll be sure to share that with you, Caleb. Oh, it's not EPQC, it's APQC. So APQC is a business process classification framework. It's a benchmarking framework for business processes. It's APQC, the letter A is in Apple, P is in Peter, Q is in Quebec, and C is in Charlie, apqc.com. We've taken the APQC framework and have built it into the Navvia Process Designer. It has business processes, financial HR, a whole spectrum of processes. It's quite well respected. It's been around for about 25 years, and it's a very popular framework for people doing business processes. I'm going to move on here a little bit. At the end, I can pick up any questions I didn't get to, but in the interest of time, I'd just like to move forward a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about process mapping and deliverables creation. There's a lot more to process documentation than a workflow map. And I've seen it. People I say, can you share your current process documentation with me? And it's a Visio. It's a PowerPoint. Sometimes it's a Visio not even using process modeling shapes. They literally drew boxes and connected lines. So the level of Visio skills obviously wasn't there. So I've seen like all levels, but too many people think that the process map is as far as you need to go. And that's just scratching the surface. Having good process design and documentation is critical for a number of reasons, because the more comprehensive your information and your documentation, there'll be benefits, right? So you need to get beyond just that thought that it's a workflow map. First of all, comprehensive process documentation can help streamline operations, improve efficiency, reduce costs, enhance quality. How can it do all of that? Because it can help you identify bottlenecks in your operations. It can help you through, if you've established metrics and key performance indicators for your process, you can use those to see where your process is being inefficient. Improving efficiency and streamlining operations will obviously help reduce costs. And then it also will enhance the quality because everybody is on the same page about what they have to do. If you don't know what the process is, well, you're gonna do what you think it is, and it might not be the right thing. Good process documentation is also basically the bedrock of identifying inefficiencies, reducing errors and variability, and making sure there's the consistency, which I already spoke to. This is an important part, and especially in organizations that are experiencing overhead with older employees retiring, you need to be able to train new employees. And a lot of times in organizations, you might have a process documented, but it hasn't been updated in 10 years. I'm serious. And that person who owns the process walks out the door. Where's the information of how it's done? How do you train new employees? How do you ensure that you're complying with industry standards and regulations? And again, if your process isn't accurately reflecting what's being done, how do you work on continual improvement? So, it's really important to have this documentation in place. Also, with so many organizations transforming their organizations to digital enterprises, to doing process automation, having that process documentation is the blueprint that's going to let you do that effectively. I've read somewhere that as many as 75% of major digital transformation initiatives fail. And one of the key reasons is a lack of good requirements. People try to automate a process by focusing on the automation tool and not on the actual process they're trying to automate. So process documentation is really there to help you enable understanding. Now, you might laugh, right? Who would design a process like this? Well, I'm going to tell you, I see it all the time. I see people coming in and I'm on a 32-inch monitor here right now. And if I had to zoom, if I had to read, if this was a real process, this is just an image. But if this was a real process, I'd have to zoom in on my 32-inch monitor to read it. And then I would lose the context of where I am in the process. We were dealing with a potential with a prospect, and they sent me samples of their process documentation. Well, the process documentation was like 40 steps wide. You just didn't know where you were. And there was nothing other than the flowchart. So you didn't know who did it, what tools supported it, or anything about it. Yes, the process was documented, but it was not in a consumable way that would help people understand. So this is definitely not the way to do it. As a matter of fact, though, if you look at this process, you'll notice it's kind of organized in these little chunks. Well, each of these chunks, in decision boxes are what spawn you off to the different chunks, really represent different activities in your process. So wouldn't it be better to just have a process map for activity 1, a process map for activity 2? So when someone's in there, you're in the context of that activity. Maybe the first decision box that says, is this a new customer? Well, now you're looking at the new customer flow, not trying to look at the new customer flow and every other part of the process at the same time. So breaking these things out. And what I've learned from my experience is that, and also the APQC framework kind of validated this, because when I started looking at their business process framework, most processes can be defined in 4, 5, 6 major steps. Take incident management. You detect an incident, you record an incident, you try to do first, resolution of an incident, you escalate an incident, you resolve the incident, you recover the incident. Think of change management. You submit a change ticket, you evaluate the change, you approve the change, you implement the change, you close the change. There's 5. Most processes can be really thought of in 5, 6, 7 major steps. So organize your processes this way. It's really from a concept that's called information mapping. So information mapping, and I've got is a structured approach. It's a formal approach. I'll give you a link to the website on information mapping, but it's a structured approach that is around organizing and presenting information. And the goal is to create documents that are easy to read, understand, and use. The information mapping techniques breaks things down into smaller, more manageable units, information chunks, and then organize those in a hierarchy that allows readers to quickly find the information they need. It's based on the principle that people learn and process information more effectively when it's presented in a clear and logical manner. That flow diagram I showed earlier was not presented in a clear and logical manner. This approach is commonly used in technical writing, but it can be applied to any type of communication. So an example of that is take a document like this. So I'm sending out a memo on the reorganization of the company. Now, if I did a challenge here and I said, you got 20 seconds to read this memo, and then I'm going to give you a test on the material, now you'll see how, you might do well, you probably won't. Information mapping says, take that information and structure it. So right here, I can see, oh, there's the background. Oh, we're doing a new division. There's some management changes. We're going to do a notification to staff, and here's some of the key dates. It's all same information presented in a structured way. One is very difficult to understand. The other is much much easier to understand. So when I document processes, I try to use this information, organizing things in logical ways, because it provides a lot of benefits. It makes it easy to find the information you need, but also you can ignore the information you don't need and not be overwhelmed by that spaghetti of a process flow that's just confusing. So you can focus on what's important to you. And then you can also spin off different versions of the document that are more technically related or more management related, but all the information is in one place. So when I document a process, this is what I settled upon as being the key aspect. So what's a description of the process? Put thing in context, a paragraph or two that says, hey, this process is to do this. So everyone knows why we're here. Process goals and objectives. So why are we doing it? What's the goal of this process? And what are some of the 5 or 6 key objectives that we're trying to achieve from this process? Who are the roles? Who are the players in the process? What tools are being used to support this process? The process maps. Remember, there's more to a process document than the maps, but the maps are incredibly important. What are those 5 or 6 or 7 major activities? And describe them in a paragraph or two. So there's context to this section of the process. Then you get into the details, those different steps in the process. Who's responsible? What are the inputs? What are the outputs? What are the work instructions or procedures? How are you going to control this process? What are your metrics, policies, control objectives? Then the automation requirements. What are the user stories, technical and functional requirements you need to support the process? All of this is part of a good process document, including links to external documentation and even a glossary of common terms and definitions. And if all your processes are documented in this fashion, HR onboarding, well, the purpose of HR onboarding is to ensure that new employees have an easy, productive way of being onboarded into the system. They're given the tools, they're given the training. So what are the objectives? To ensure that 100% of the employees are onboarded, get their email address and tools within the first 5 days. Process roles and responsibilities, the HR manager, the hiring manager. I mean, you can document any process in this fashion. So if you want to take a look at that from an information mapping perspective, there's also a hierarchy, because the description of the process sits on top. Then you understand the goals and objectives, the process rules, the controls, the metrics and policies. And for a lot of people, well, maybe if you include the process activities, that's all the information they need. They don't need any more than that. Someone else needs to know the process tasks. Someone else needs to know the inputs, outputs, responsibilities, work instructions. Someone needs to get down to the technical requirements. If you've organized your information correctly, you can pull out those pieces and provide the information to the stakeholder in the context that they need the information, but still have a comprehensive hierarchy of information mapped. So let me show you what I mean by that. So I just loaded in a very simple change management process from one of our templates. We have a lot of templates in the Navvia tool, by the way. So I've got a description of the process. The change management process manages alterations to technology, systems, and infrastructure. So I know what the process is all about. I go into the process, and I have across the top here, I've captured all of that information. So what is a description of the process? What is the goal of the process? So the goal is to have a standard way of implementing changes in an organization. What are some of my objectives? Who are the key roles in the process? What's a change manager responsible for? So organizing the information in such a way that you're capturing all the pieces in a logical manner. The process controls that has your metrics, it has your policies, it has your control objectives, even down to technical specifications, which I'll discuss a little bit later. Then in the process itself, organizing things by its activities. So I have raising and recording a change with a description of that task. I have the actual flow that goes with it. And then the technique to model is interesting. It's something that's based on line of visibility modeling. So at the top line is the key customer of your process. So in this case, it's the requester of a change. So I can see wherever the requester is involved. They're involved in requesting the change. They might be consulted in providing more details. And as I move through the different activities, I can see here when it's scheduled, they're notified it's scheduled. If it's canceled, they're notified it's canceled. Maybe they're involved in the implementation and need to participate or be notified. And also the requester is going to be informed at the end of the process. So that top line can show you at a glance who the key customers are, because that's why the process is there, right? To support these key customers. So make them front and center. Also, I have a bottom lane here that shows the other processes that might be connected to this. So for those of you in IT, a release might drive a change. An incident might drive a change. A problem might drive a change. So these processes could be inputs to this. Also, what artifacts are created? A change record is created, an updated change record, a change schedule, and some tools are updated. In this case, the CMDB in a tool like ServiceNow could be updated as part of this change process. So organizing by swim lanes does a couple of things for you. You see the key person on top, you see the tools and inter-process relationships, and in the middle, in this case, there's only the submitter involved, but it could be 3 or 4 people doing the work and providing that information up to the end customer and down into the different systems and tools that support the process. Further, use of sub-processes can help organize. If the flow of the process, the standard flow of a change is pretty straightforward. Create the change, provide the details, calculate the risk of the change. Is this change colliding with other changes? You don't want to do too many changes at the same time. Submit the change. But what if it's an emergency? Well, have that off as a separate path. And then you can focus your attention on this. So again, applying those principles of information mapping makes the doc. If you went across these 5 activities and 2 sub-processes and put them on one flow, it'd be incredibly complex. But you need the complexity because you also want to drill in and capture things like a description of that task, the roles involved in the task, the inputs, the outputs, any user stories or procedures. So a logical way of organizing the information can produce great results. And some examples of those, I can go over to this area here, documents and reports. So what I've done is I've created 3 different views of the process. So the first view is an executive summary. So going in and capturing all that information, but presenting to the end user just an executive summary, which is relatively simple. It has the description, the roles, a RACI chart, the activity, and some of the tasks. If I go to the RACI chart, I can see all the different roles and who's responsible or not. If I go into the workflow, I see a description of the activity, the map, and then a description of each step. Very, very simple. But maybe I'm someone with more more demanding needs. I can go back and say, hey, I want to see a more complete process document. So because you've mapped the information in an organized, logical way, you're able to go ahead and produce a more comprehensive process document. This one goes much longer. Now we have the controls, the metrics, the policies. We get into a RACI chart just for that activity, as well as a RACI chart for the whole process. We get into more details around each task. For example, what's the output of this task? What roles are involved in this task and what are their responsibilities? So again, because you've mapped the information in a logical way, you can produce different documents in a very logical way. Now, I think I saw some questions, Catherine. Are there any new questions?
Yes, we do have one from Raquel and Dawn in the Q&A tab.
Okay. When you say organized in logical ways, I want to know logical for who? That's a great question. because you're organizing the information, because, okay, first of all, if you buy into the concept, and I'm just going to back up my slides a little bit. If you buy into the concept that all of this information is relevant to relevant to the process, right? It's not a process if it doesn't have controls, metrics, or policies. It's not a process if it doesn't have the workflow. It's not a process if you don't understand roles and responsibilities, work instructions. So all of that, if you buy into the fact that this is what entails a well-documented process, then it's logical to the group, because you could present to them the information that's only relevant to them. So if they're involved in the workflow here, if they're part of the again, I apologize if I'm using IT terms here, but a process is a process. If they're involved in emergency changes, not everyone in the organization is involved in emergency change. So it's logical to have that organized separately so that the people who are involved can go right there and focus and get the information. So I always say you need to present the information in a form that is suitable for the stakeholder consuming it. I've seen people give very detailed, overly detailed information to someone who looks at that and their eyes glaze over because it's just too much and they don't need half of what's in there. So when I say logical, every stakeholder has different needs of the documentation. If you're training a new employee, it's probably better to give a high-level document. If you're going in and showing an auditor, it's probably more important to show a detailed document. So it's logical to the consumer, but you have to also buy in that you believe. I mean, you may be, I'm not saying you are, but some people say a workflow is enough. I disagree. So having all the information logically organized makes you then take almost like a puzzle and take the pieces you need and supply that to the end user. I hope that answered the question. There's another question. Are swim charts led? That was a great, Raquel had another question. Are swim lanes read left to right, top to down? Yes, left to right. And that's a pet peeve of mine. You go in and you look at some process documents, tasks come out of the bottom, they go up to the top. So the way I like to document is the flow goes left to right. Flow goes left to right. If you're updating an artifact, you can come out of the bottom of the task. And these little consistent ways of doing things then makes it say, oh, if I see something coming out of the bottom, I'm probably creating an artifact or I'm connecting to another process. But the flow typically goes left to right. I try to avoid, having stuff coming out of the top, out of the bottom. I mean, in that other example I showed, stuff was coming out every which way. That's fine. I mean, I'm not trying to critique how people do things, but just from my perspective, then it's not consistent. It's hard for me to follow. So when you build some rules into how something's built, it just makes it easier to follow. Any other questions? Paul. Paul was asking, process efficiency optimization methodologies. You're asking about lean. That's actually my favorite approach to use. You look at the value stream of the process and then use lean to look at things like cycle time. But yes, I'm a big proponent of lean. I think that's probably, Paul, one of the better ways to look at this. Christopher says, does Navvia automatically segment the documents into different levels? Yes. Well, I make sure I understand your question. You can build this. See, these are what's called document profiles. And if I go into a document profile, it specifies what the cover page, the table of contents, header and footers. Also, it lets you choose what you want to put in the document from all the content that you can have. So Navvia allows you to create from one process as many different views as you want, and then you can designate those views to different users. Ying wants to know how to enable the survey feature. Catherine, can you just take a note? Ying wants to know how to activate the survey feature, and we can get back to her on that.
Sure, I will.
Your administrator needs to do it. It probably, Ying, I don't know who the administrator is for your account, but that one of your employees who administers it, they would be able to do it, but we'll get back to you with an email. Oh, here's a good one. Don, I often find myself explaining the difference between process documents and standard operating procedures. Okay, so you are correct, Don. So what Don is saying, you got this high level process with a RACI chart and a high level flow, and you got work instructions and procedures. And are the two separate? Yes, a work instruction is not a process. Some people only have work instructions and not a process. A process is like a map. You know, if I'm trying to get to California from New York, I can see a big picture map that shows my route there. That's your process. The work instructions is the step-by-step. I turn here, I get on the I-95, I do this, I do that. That's my work instructions. You know, work instructions are important, but also I need to know how to get from New York to California. So the two are separate. What we've done in Navvia is we allow you to capture the work instructions as part of the process and then include them if you'd like to. And Christopher's asking if it goes from a level 1 to 4 or 5 documentation. Yeah, that's why I was just saying we go all the way down to the work instructions and procedures. I'm just going to move ahead a little bit because we're almost at the top of the hour. I'm happy to stay on though for extra time, so that's not a problem. The next piece I want to talk about is requirements gathering and process automation. And I really believe that process documentation is the blueprint that can drive process automation and digital transformation. You can't automate what you don't understand. And I've seen it, man. I've been in this business for a long time. The people who said, I'm going to implement the tool out of the box. Well, that's not going to work because your company isn't out of the box. Maybe if you're a small company, you can kind of take that approach. But if you're a company that's been around a while, you've got internal processes, interprocess relations. You got things that you'd have to tell your whole company to change the way they do things to work out of the box. So, you know, that's why a lot of these automation initiatives fail and end up with a ton of technical debt, is because they didn't spend enough time understanding the blueprint that they were trying to automate, in my opinion. For example, let's say you have a process. Employee submits an expense form, the manager approves it, the manager submits it for payment, the employee is reimbursed. Simple little process, right? But you can map user stories to this process. And there's actually a technique called user story mapping. If you look it up on the net, there's a lot of information on the technique. But you can map a user story, one or more user stories, to the employee submits an expense reform. For example, the employee conforming to accounting policies must submit a detailed expense form. And you can actually map more user stories to different steps. You go one step further. What is the technical requirements that fulfill the user story for that step in the process? So I need to have these forms if I'm going to build an automated expense reporting form, here's the fields I need. I need to create an expense report number. I need to send a notice to a manager once it's been submitted. I need to manage the status. Maybe I need a way of letting the employee take photographs of their receipts and uploading them into the expense management tool. I need to know the technical requirements to fulfill the user story that maps to the step. The beauty of user story mapping, though, is if you have user stories for all the steps in your process, you've probably got a very comprehensive set of requirements. So what we do in Navvia is in the workflow, for every step in the process, you can capture user stories. So this step has one user story that says, as the change management process owner, I'd like the change form layout configured so all the relevant information is captured and the implementers have all the information they need to progress those changes in an efficient and timely manner. I got some acceptance criteria. So again, very much at a business level here. The process is at a business level, the user story is at a business level, but these user stories roll up to some specifications. So now we see all the user stories across the whole process. And if I open up a user story, I can now see it's tied to my ITSM tool project, my change management epic. It's a high priority. And I've got some items associated with that. I need to put on the form a backup plan, the approvers, the affected CIs. And then from capturing this information, easily produce process user story documentation from the same model. And it has, for example, now the user story for the change form layout, and then all the fields you need to put on the form and the description of those fields. And there's even more technical information behind this about drop-down values and stuff, but it's just not in this particular view. And for good measure, I've also included things like the process state diagram that shows how a ticket goes through a system, the approval state diagram, and for context, a set of the workflows. So I just, that question earlier about logical to who, I pulled out pieces that would be logical to the developer. The user stories, the technical requirements, the state diagrams, and the workflows for context. So that sort of brings everything together. So I know I went 2 minutes over. I will stay around and answer any questions anyone has. Be happy to do that. I just want to wrap up with a couple of slides, and then I'll open the floor to any more questions. So, I was trying to convey as much practical information as possible about how processes are designed and documented. And I think I mentioned to you, we built the Navvia tool because we were process consultants. So I think that was maybe something different, because we were people who built process and assessed process. So if you're interested in learning more about the Navvia Process Designer and how it can help you with process design and sharing, user story and requirements, assessment and governance, all the different templates that we have in our tools to make you more productive, the way you can easily share processes. It'd be great if you want to get a free trial. So you can basically schedule a demo of the tool by going to navvia.com contact, and we'd be happy to do a real deep dive demo of the tool for you or your team. Or you can go to our website and you can get a free trial of the tool as well. We like to do these webinars, and we have a couple of other webinars coming up. So we actually have a webinar in August that's really more focused on assessments and really diving deep into how you conduct an assessment, how you organize the project, et cetera. And we're going to be doing key factors for digital transformation success. We also have a couple, I think on the August, we're going to be joined by a fellow practitioner, one of our clients, who's been using this practically in conducting their own assessments. So that person will be able to share with you the results they're seeing in their company. So anyway, we try to get as much as possible customers to join on these. So these are just some of the upcoming webinars that we have. So I want to thank you. I am going to stick around and ask. I see there's like 8 or 9 questions there. So I'm going to stick around and answer any of the questions. Just for housekeeping, we're going to send a copy of this recording out to you folks in the next day or so, including the slides. If you have any questions, just respond to that email and we'll be happy to answer the questions. If you want to set up another session, I'm very willing to help you guys out if you have any, just want to pick my brain on anything. So be happy to do that. So let's take a look in the chat here. Oh, well, thank you, Karen. Just appreciate the feedback.
Also, David, we have a last question in the Q&A tab from Leo.
So Leo was asking, does it include a capability to enforce the existing ServiceNow state values? Enforce, it depends what you mean by enforce. We have ServiceNow templates that use the out-of-the-box state values in ServiceNow. So if you're following the templates, our ServiceNow templates, in essence, we're enforcing those, but we don't actually enforce them in ServiceNow. So I hope that answered your question, Leo. Just going through the chat here. Who does the organizational change management aspects of your projects? Do you work with resources in your company? Okay, so hi, I don't know if you're still on, Karen, but if you are, so we don't really do the consulting work anymore. But when back in the day, different members of our team had organizational change management skills. We followed a variety of different change management models. If you actually go into our website and the blog, there's a couple of articles on organizational change management. that would be that you might find interesting. But there's different models that we in our blog post, we identify different models and some of the models that we like to use. So if you'd like to learn more about what we think about organizational change management, just go in and type in, change management in the navvia.com/blog, do the search change management. You'll find some interesting articles there. There's something even worse, automation of an inefficient process or doing it wrong without considering all the stakeholders and business rules. It's a nightmare trying to fix the system as we operate. No kidding. I mean, you need to get the blueprint down right, Jessica, before you actually implement. Oh, Donna, that's so nice to you to say. We got to connect at some point. Hopefully, if you're still online. But I always enjoy talking to you as well, and I always recommend your process. Donna's group, ITSM Academy, has an awesome course on becoming a process designer, and I really highly recommend it. Christopher, thank you. Douglas is saying, I've seen a lot of instances where workflows contain a lot of details to the extent procedures are reflected, and this defeats the purpose. Oh my God, Douglas, you're singing to the choir. I've seen process documents that had mix, huge spreadsheets that says it went down to a super level of detail, and then on another branch it says implement as required. What does implement as required mean? It's crazy. Information mapping, start high, go detailed, best way to work. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. Thank you, everybody. Cynthia, Karen, Syed. I would like to Syed, just schedule it with Catherine, and I'd be happy to set up an extra. I've got 30 messages here. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to them all. But yeah, I'd be happy to set up that with you, Saeed, if you're on. Catherine, if you can make a note to connect with Saeed, that would be appreciated.
Yep.
Thank you, Thorsten. Thanks, sir. And it's been too long, Thorsten. I'd like to connect with you at some point as well. Thanks, Jessica. All right, I think I'm at the end of the list here. Once again, you'll get a copy of the slides, and we'll be happy to, if you want to set up some more time with us, we'd be happy to share. We love sharing, and I hope you all appreciate it today. And I just so much appreciate your time today. So have a great rest of your afternoon. Bye for now.